Daf Samach Amud Aleph will begin Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis, the Gemara, the beginning of the Gemara right at the bottom of the Amud. Boy Rav Papa, Ba'avoda Achas Tanan or B'shtei Avodas Tanan. The Mishnah taught us that if there is a machshava of Shaloi Lishma, the Pesach is possible, Shaloi Lishma and Lishma, or Lishma and Shaloi Lishma, it's also possible. What are the circumstances? Are we talking about a person had a machshava, for instance, during the same avodah, he shachted to begin with Lishma, with the intent that it should be a Korban Pesach, and then at the end of it, the shlit, he changed and he intended it to be Shaloi Lishma for a different Korban? Or are we talking where, for instance, the shlit was entirely Lishma, but then the Srika or the Kabbalah was done with an intent Shaloi Lishma? So what is the circumstance of the Mishnah? Ba'avoda achas tanan, are we talking about one avodah of Rav Yasihi, the Amar af B'gemara Dvar of Adam Nitfas? Do we say it's talking about one avodah? Now, if we're talking about one avodah, that means that it would be going dafka according to the sheet of Rav Yasi. Rav Yasi says that a person is accountable even for the end of his words. Rameir says no, because he says you're not accountable for the end of the words, because the Rav Meir ha'amar tfais lashon rishon. According to Rameir, he says you only recognize the first expression that he makes, not the second one. So if we're talking by one avodah, and we would say that if he had started off with an intention of lishma, and then he concluded, for instance, the shchita or the ma'achshava shaloi lishma, that it is possible, that would be going dafka according to Rav Yasi, not Rameir. Rav Yasi says you're accountable for the end of what he said, but Rameir says it's only the beginning. The end is irrelevant. The case of the machlekes between Rav Yasi and Rameir is as follows. A person says that this should be, he has a korban and he wants to make a tumura. And he says that it should be exchanged, it's a tumura's oila. He wants to exchange it for an oila. And then he says tumura shlomim. He says shlomim. So what is this animal now? By tomorrow, when a person makes an exchange, it's hayahu tomorrow seyah kodesh. So the initial korban is kodesh. The one that he wants to exchange is also kodesh. Now he said initially an oila, then he said a shlomim. Is it kodesh as an oila, or yamakriv as an oila, or yamakriv as a shlomim? So according to Rameir, he says tafos lashon rishon. The only thing that's relevant is the first expression. The shlomim is not, so you're makriv as an oila. Rabbi Yasi says, af b'gemara dvar of Adam nitfas, and you're accountable even for the second expression. So he says it has to graze till it gets a mum, and you use the money for both an oila and a shlomim. So now, in this case over here, if we say we're talking about one avodah, and the korban is possible, we must be going according to Dafka Rav Yasi and not Rameir. Because according to Rameir, it's Tavas Lashon Rishon. So if he shechted with an intent of Lishma and then he changed Shaloi Lishma, the second Lashon would be irrelevant. And therefore, you would say it's Lishma. So it can't go according to Rameir. The Mishnah that says it's possible would have to be going according to Rav Yasi, who says af b'gemara dvar of Adam nitfas, and therefore you're accountable for the second expression as well, and therefore he had a machshava shaloi lishma. So are we talking about one avodah, and therefore we're going down according to Rav Yasi? Oy Dilma, the Gemara says b'shtei avodas not. Perhaps we're talking about two avodas, that it was two separate avodah, meaning the shchita, for instance, was completely lishma, and then he had a machshava by the Kabbalah. Now, if that's the case, the Mishnah could be going even according to Rameir, because even the Rameir says Tavos Lashon Rishon, Hani Mila B'avoda Achas. That's only on one avodah. In one avodah, we say, well, the first expression is relevant, and the second one is not accountable. But if it would be two separate avodas, he's minded that it's possible, because each avodah could passel the korban. Any avodah on its own would make the korban possible as shaloi lishma. And therefore, even if the shchita, for instance, is lishma, but if he had a machshava on the Kabbalah shaloi lishma, that is independent of the shchita, and his machshava on the Kabbalah would be the opening statement of that would be considered to be entirely Shalei Lishma, and it would passel the korban. So that's the Shiloh. Are we talking about one avodah we're going dafik according to Rav Yaisi, or are we talking about by two avodas and it can be going even according to Rav Meir? Amrei Hai, in which case are we discussing? In Neima Ashalei Lishma Ulishma, if you're talking about the case where initially it was Shalei Lishma and then it was Lishma, well, what's the Shaila? Bein b'avodah achas, bein b'shtei avodas. Whether it's talking about one avodah or two avodas, it would make a difference. Bein l'Rav Meir, bein l'Rav Yaisi, if salam mikamaisa, it's already possible from the first one. Because if he initially started it off Shalei Lishma, then both would agree that it's possible, regardless if it's one avodah or two avodas. The Rav Yaisi nami, because Rav Yaisi says af b'gemar dvarav arav nitfas islay. He holds that it's also accountable on the Gemara, on his last words, on his final words. But he's also accountable for his initial words. So if initially started off Shalei Lishma, everyone would agree that that on its own, right away, it would passel it. So that's not a Shaila. Ella, the case that we're declaring must be the case is it must be the case that it's lishma first. Initially it was lishma, then secondly shaloi lishma mai. So that's the question. Initially he started off lishma, then he switched, he veered, and he went shaloi lishma. Are we talking where this was in the same avodah and therefore it's possible only according to Rav Yaisi, who says according to Rav Meir, since he started off Lishma, that's all that he's accountable for, that's all that's relevant? Or are we talking about two avodas and it's going Bain according to Rav Yaisi, Bain Rav Meir? Tashma, let's bring it right from the following up. Pesach Sheshpachta Shalei Lishma, he initially shafted it Shalei Lishma. V'kibel v'halach v'zarach Shalei Lishma, and he did the rest of the avodas also Shalei Lishma. So it's possible. So the Gemara, what's the case? If you'll tell me like it seems it's written in the Mishnah, what's the point to say that he shafted Shaloi Lishma and he did the rest of the avodah Shaloi Lishma? The shchita alone would passel it. That in itself would passel it. What's the chiddush? Why are we saying that he did and also he did the Kabbalah and Aloich and Zriga Shaloi Lishma? Why is that relevant? The shchita alone Shaloi Lishma would passel it. Elalam hachiktani must be that it means as follows: a Pesach sheshachta Shaloi Lishma, he shachted the korban Pesach Shaloi Lishma. Or inami, alternatively, sheshachta lishma, he shachta lishma, v'kibel v'halach v'hilach v'zarach shaloi lishma, and then he did the rest of the avodah shaloi lishma. Or inami, shachta v'kibel v'hilach lishma, or alternatively, he did the rest of the avodah lishma, but v'zarach shaloi lishma. Dav lishtei avodas. So it must be that he did it. What it means is that he did the Pesach, he shachted the Pesach shaloi lishma. It's possible. Or even if he shachted it lishma, he did the rest of the avodah shaloi lishma. Or even if he did the first two lishma, the rest shaloi lishma, or the first three lishma, then the last one shaloi lishma. In any of these cases, as long as one of the avodas were done shaloi lishma, it's possible. So dav lishtei avodas. So you see that we're talking about two avodas. One was done lishma, or several were done lishma, and one or several were done shaloi lishma. But the lishma and the lo lishma are on different avodas. In the Seifa says lishma shaloi lishma. If you did lishma and both shaloi lishma, a combination of both, so then it's possible hechidan. If you're going to tell me that it's two different avodas, hainaresha, well, we just said two avodas, two separate avodas. That was the previous case. Elala b'avodah achas. Must be that this case over here, the Seifa, when it says Lishma Shaloi Lishma, is a Avodah Achas, it's one Avodah. Rav Yaisi, the Omar Afig Mar Dvar Varam Nitvas, and therefore the Mishnah must be going down according to Rav Yaisi that says that Afig Mar Dvar Varam Nitvas. When it says like Lo'olam Shtei Avodas, I'll tell you perhaps that the Seifa is also talking about Shtei Avodas. So what's the point? I already know Shtei Avodas. No, there's a chiddush, because the reisha, the koy b'shchita, v'kamachai b'shchita, kamachasha b'shchita, the reisha is talking about two avodas, but it's talking about For instance, he is shechted, and he shechted it shaloi lishma, with the intent that he's shechting with the intent that the shchita should be shaloi lishma. Or alternatively, he's doing the zrika, and with an intent that he wants the zrika to be for a different korban. Seifa the koi b'shchita v'kachashe b'zrika, but the seifa is telling you another chiddush, that even if he shechs it, not that the intent that the shchita should be for a different korban, but he has in mind, he's shechting this with the intent that the zrika is going to do the zrika for that on behalf should be for a different korban. That also passes it. The Amar Hareni Sheikh as a Pesach Lishma, Lizrek Dam Shaloi Lishma. He's shechting the Pesach Lishma. So what it means Lishma, Lishloi Lishma, it means he's shechting the Pesach Lishma. The Shechita should be Lishma. But Almanas that the Zrika should be Shaloi Lishma. V'kamash Malan, and the Chiddush is the Mechashim Avodah Avodah, that you can be machashiv. There is a machshava of a psul, apostle machshava, takes effect even though you're doing it at one avodah, with the intent that a different avodah should be possible. It still takes effect. V'haina the boy the Rapapa had that shaila in Masechet Zvachim. He had that shaila. Does it take effect or not? We can prove from here, according to this malach, that yes, machashim avodah avodah. So you can't prove it from this case. Tashma. If you had a machshava initially, shaloi lishma, and then lishma, then it's possible. So if you're going to tell me it's by two different avodas, so why would the Mishnah have to tell me this? You already told me that if initially it was lishma, and then shaloi lishma, it was possible. Shaloi lishma miboya. If it's shaloi lishma, it's already possible from l'shaloi lishma. So shaloi lishma l'shma boy, you have to tell me that it's possible. It already became possible from the machshava shaloi lishma. So elamai, it can't be talking about two avodas, because then it would be pashut if the first avodah was shaloi lishma, then even though the second was lishma, but it's already possible. Elala b'avodah must be that it's talking about one avodah. It's talking about one avodah, and what's the chiddush? As Rashi explained, because you might say that in the first avodah, if he started off shaloi lishma, but then he said lishma, you might think that he's retracting, he's being chayzer from his initial machshav. He started off shaloi lishma, but now it's lishma. You might think it's a chazorah, he's retracting, and he really means it to be lishma. No, it's possible. It's telling you it's possible because even Rabbi Yossi says af begemar dvar varam nitpas. But not only Bigmar Dvarav, and the first machshava of Shalei Lishma is binding and it's possible. So Elolav must be about Vaidachas. Umidaseva Vaidachas, Reisha Nami Vaidachas. So that must be teaching you that the Reisha is also Vaidachas, and the Mishnah therefore is only Rabbi Yossi, not Rameir. The Gemara says, no. Lo'olam b'shtei Avaidas. Really, I'll tell you, it's talking about two different Avaidas. And in Nechanami, you're right, we really don't need this, we know this, but just for consistency, just for consistency and to balance it out, the Tana mentions this case as well, but we really don't need it. But really, I'll tell you, it's talking about Shtei Avodas, you don't have a raya. Tashma, let's bring a raya from the following. If a person shechted the korban pesach for people who are unable to eat it, they can't eat it, they can't even do the kazayas of it. So the Mishnah talks about different psulim. So that also passes the korban pesach. If you shechted for people who are not part of this chabur, they're not registered as part of this group, or someone who's an orel, he didn't have a milah, as for instance, Mesu Bar Machnas Milah, or L'Tmeim or the Tomei. So they can't eat the Korban Pesach. So they can't eat the Korban Pesach, and he shechs it for these type of people. That passes the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach is possible. It's possible. So now, Hachav Shita B'Vaydachas. We're only mentioning one avoid over here. It's only shechta, so we're talking about one avoid. So therefore, the Reisha also has to be avodah achas. Where it says no, midir, hakirisa. They're two separate cases. Seifa b'avodah achas, Reisha b'avodah achas b'shtei avodas. But perhaps I'll tell you the Reisha could be either one avodah or two avodas. Just because in this case is talking about one avodah, it's not a raya to the Reisha. Tashma lo'oichlav v'shaloi lo'oichlav. He shechted it for those who can eat and can't eat. It's kosher. The Korban Pesach, when we say that he shechted it for those who can't eat, that it's possible, it's only if that nobody can eat from it. But if it's shechted for at least some people who are able to eat it, then the Korban is still kosher. So if he shechted for both, then it's kosher. So hechidami. If you're telling me that we're talking about two avodas, that he, for instance, shechted it for those who can eat, and he with an intent that the zrika should be for those who can't. So, and it's kosher. The time of the kosher bezrika, that ain't a machshava for the zrika. There ain't machshavas oichlem bezrika, because there's no machshava psul by the zrika. Where the Torah says that it has to be for people who can eat the Korban Pesach, the Torah says ish lefi ochla tachoisu alaseh. It says ish lefi ochla, only people can eat the Korban Pesach. Tachoisu, you shecht the set, the lamb. So therefore, this is where the Torah is makpid that it has to be for the purpose of people who can eat the Korban Pesach. That's only mentioned by shchita. So it's only where shchita where that would be a psul if he shechted shloi lo'oichlav. So now you're telling me over here lo'oichlav shloi lo'oichlav. If you're telling me that it's shtei avodas, and you're telling me the reason that it's kosher, why? Is because zrika is not a factor. As zrika shloi lo'oichlav can't possible. It's only the shchita, and therefore, if that's the case, you'd make a diuk haba avodah achas. If it would be only one avodah could go in b'shchita, that there would only be b'shchita, meaning he shechted it for those who can and can't eat. The mahanya b'machshavas oichlem, where in shchita the machshavas oichlem does take effect, does possible. You're telling me that it's possible? You're telling me in such a case that it would be with one avodah that it would be possible? V'akaimalan makes this oichlem possible. But we know that as long as part of the chabur, part of the group can eat it, it doesn't possible. When it says shaloi lo'oichlem means that nobody can eat from it. So therefore, it must be over here, alallah b'avodah achas. Therefore, it must be talking where it's avodah achas, that even by shchita itself, if it's shaloi lo'oichlem v'shaloi lo'oichlem, it's kosher. So since we proved that this case is avodah achas, the Reisha also be avodah achas, where again it says midir. Akirisa. Seifa b'avodah achas, and Chanam, you've proved conclusively that the seif is avodah achas. But Reisha, b'avodah achas, b'shtei avodas, the Reisha could be either with one avodah or two avodas, meaning the Reisha could be talking in two avodas, and it's going both according to Rav Meir and Rav Yossi, or it could be in one avoda, and the reason that it's possible is because dafka, because it's going according to Rav Yossi, that af b'gemar dvarav arav nitfas.